I had not a clue. You know, a lot of people say that wives know, and we've not found that a lot in the couples we work with. I had not a clue. He walked in, he'd been at a meeting, and I knew something was horribly wrong, and I thought someone had died, and I didn't know it was our marriage. And so when he sat down and made his confession, I was absolutely shell-shocked.
That's Mona Shriver, our guest last time here on Focus on the Family. Mona's describing what it was like to learn of her husband's affair after 19 years of marriage. Perhaps you're in a similar situation, and you believe that your marriage is beyond fixing. Well, you need to know there is hope in those devastating circumstances, and we're going to hear about it today from a couple who has been there. I'm Dr. Bill Meyer with my friend and co-host Dr. Juliana Slattery, and we're tackling a very tough topic, one that impacts millions of marriages across this country every year, and that's infidelity. Julie, some people may think, sure, extramarital affairs are happening in the culture. I know that. But a lot of Christians may not realize that this is an all too common experience, even within the church.
Bill, unfortunately, the statistics between the church population and just the normal population is not at all different when it comes to infidelity. And we are continuing a conversation that we started yesterday with Gary and Mona Shriver, who have written a book called Unfaithful, Rebuilding Trust After Infidelity. And just that title, Bill, really strikes me because we think about infidelity as something that you can't recover from. Mm-hmm. And you think about, okay, if one of the spouses has been involved in adultery, then where's the divorce attorney? You know, it's time to say this marriage is over. Let's move on. But the Shrivers have a ministry of helping couples who've experienced infidelity actually rebuild a strong marriage.
Mm-hmm. It's truly amazing, Julie, to hear how the Shrivers have recovered from this affair and have strengthened their marriage, probably to a point where it's stronger than it was before. Mona, one of the things that you both believe in very strongly is the importance of support groups, or at least one other couple that has shared this kind of experience who can come alongside you, mentor you, guide you through the process. There's something so healing about knowing that we're in this boat together. We're not alone. It's a devastating sin. It's devastated our marriage. But we can come out on the other side if we have those around us bearing our burdens.
You're correct in stating that, because one of the things that entered into our recovery very, very early in the process was we were told we could recover. Our pastor and our counselor told us that couples had, but we didn't know of one. The only people we had ever heard of that had been through adultery were divorced, or they were still together, but everybody knew how miserable they were. Mm-hmm. And so I asked both our pastor and our counselor, can you find us another couple? Because we wanted to heal, but we didn't know how, and we certainly didn't even know if it could really be done.
Okay, now you're saying that you wanted to heal.
Yes.
But in the immediate aftermath, I mean, when you first find out about this affair, was that your reaction? Did you want to heal, or was there a part of you that's like, just get out of the house, we're done here?
Yeah, get this bum out of here.
Well, I knew, it's ironic. I have to back up just a little bit, because while Gary was having the affair for 3 years, I had been on another journey, and it was a spiritual journey, and I had gotten very deep into Bible study, and my relationship with the Lord had just dramatically grown. So I had become much more familiar with the scriptures, and I knew that because of the adultery, I had a scriptural basis, according to a lot of people, for a divorce. Mm-hmm. But he'd come home repentant. And there was this little voice in my head that also knew that God's plan and purpose for marriage had been permanence. And if he'd come home repentant, was I not obligated to at least try? Wow. Plus, we had 3 children. Mm-hmm. We had been around long enough to see other children of divorce and knew that it didn't go away. Things didn't get better. Mm-hmm. And again, that question of going through it alone or with him. So for a variety of reasons, I wanted to go ahead and start the journey, but I truly didn't know if we could. I just had no other option.
You didn't know because of how hurt you were and betrayed you felt, or because you didn't know if he could really change?
I didn't know if I could heal from that wound. I really didn't. Mm-hmm. And that wound was so deep, I don't even think I'd gotten to the point of wondering if he was going to change or not.
If you are willing, could you share a little bit together with us about some of the conversations that you had in the first 3 or 4 weeks after this was disclosed?
We had a lot of conversations behind closed doors, and Gary was very forthright. He answered every question, which is another big issue. I don't know if you want to go there or not about answering questions. But anyway, Gary answered all my questions, and we talked about counseling. And I thought, why go to a counselor? What's he going to do? Make it go away? Yeah. In those first few weeks, I think the focus was, Lord, please just rewind time. Let this go away because I can't live with this.
It was like a nightmare.
It is a nightmare. And, some therapists liken it to post-traumatic stress syndrome, and I personally agree.
Did you have the scene replaying over in your mind?
Yeah. The very first night, I knew I needed help, but I didn't know who to call. And Gary didn't tell you, but his partner was one of my best friends, and I couldn't call her. And so he did place the name on my heart, and I spent the next day with the woman across the table from me. But I truly was almost non-functional for a long time.
Let me ask you a question, Mona. I mean, you've talked about this obviously hundreds of times because of the speaking you do and the groups you do. But just a moment ago, I perceived just you were kind of on the edge of tears. My guess is, as many times as you've told this story, those painful memories still come back, and those conversations and those questions and that sense of betrayal, it never totally leaves you, does it?
Do you know, it's so interesting. That's a great question, because in our groups, we start the first week by sharing our stories briefly. And one night, as I had done many, many times, I shared the story, and I ended with, and I can look at you now tonight and tell you that we are fully healed. And I did a stop, and I looked around the room, and I went, who said that? And I realized we were completely healed. So in answer to your question, Bill, the pain is absolutely gone. Absolutely 100% gone. When we were writing the book, there were some tears and there were some emotions, but it was like watching a sad movie. It wasn't reliving it. Gary and I can both still get emotional, but we get emotional because we really comprehend the depth of the pain and trauma that people encounter when they're going through it. Our pain and trauma is over. We grieve that we grieved God or hurt each other, but no.
And how many years has it been?
14
years.
Yeah, I'm wondering, when you've been through something like this and your spouse has been unfaithful, are you just paranoid? I mean, do you just want to check all the cell phone records and they went out to get a gallon of milk and you just wonder, are they really getting a gallon of milk? How do you get past that?
Very, very slowly. I love what Dr. Donald Harvey says about rebuilding trust. It is the best example I've ever heard in my life. And he said, rebuilding trust is like when you have a broken leg. It is an abnormal situation. You cannot function with a broken leg. So you put a cast on it. Now, in that cast, it is still an abnormal situation. So when you're trying to rebuild trust, you are going to do some abnormal things that you cannot live that way for the rest of your life. Like the person who had the affair checking in. I'm here, honey. I'll be 3 minutes late, honey, or whatever it's going to take for that relationship. Like saying, go ahead, check my cell phone. And doing whatever it takes for the two of you, for that openness, so that I, as the spouse, can rebuild trust a baby step at a time. And then eventually, you're going to take that cast off when the leg is healed. And you're still going to walk awkward for a bit longer because you're still in that healing process. And then one day you'll notice we're walking normal again. So the rebuilding trust, the onus is on the person who had the affair to really start that process. Eventually, the person who was betrayed is going to have to give them just a little rope and take that risk of being hurt again. But it's very, very slow. And that is, again, baby steps.
You two, though, let's be honest, you're very, very unique. I mean, here you were incredibly repentant for what you had done, and you were willing to make amends and do whatever it takes. You were filled with grace and mercy because you had come to a point in your spiritual life where you said, I have to offer this to my husband. But my guess is the majority of couples that are in this situation, they don't have those aspects in their relationship. And when you're in these groups, my guess is you find that a deep walk with Christ is probably one of the determiners for success in a couple making it out the other side.
We encourage people in our groups to, the very first week is commitment. And we encourage them each individually. They need to make a determination to be committed to God. Just them and God. That's the number one priority. Then the second is a commitment to be who God wants them to be as a husband or a wife. Then the third we ask them to commit to is to create an environment for healing for their spouse. So you notice it's God, me, spouse. And that's kind of backwards, but that's where it needs to be initially. When we were looking for that other couple to come and sit across the table from us and we couldn't find them, our counselor called Gary 2 years later.
2 years.
And said, "Do you remember that need?" And Gary said, "Yeah."
Boy, we absolutely remembered that need. And he said, "Well, now, are you ready to be that couple for someone else?" Wow. And Mona and I looked at each other and went,
No. We know why people hide.
Yeah, we absolutely understand why people hide in this. Who wants to live in that valley? Who wants to tear off the scabs? Who wants to go back there? But we knew at that particular point that I don't want to say that the body let us down, but I want to say that there was no one willing. They had the I don't know.
The resources were not there in the church.
We're not there at that point in the church. And we thought, if this is going to change and God is going to call us to do this, we needed to put our comfort zone aside and we needed to step out in obedience and say, yeah, we can do that. We don't claim to be counselors. We're not going to, we don't have PhDs or anything like this. All we can be is just say we're another couple that has been down the road this before you, and we can do this. And so our counselor, very wise man, he said, okay, I'm going to put you with this other couple. And so this other couple, and we just started working together, and there was no instruction at all from him. He just said, just keep track of what makes a difference. Just and even though our affairs were different, there were a lot of similarities between them. So we just started kind of keeping track of the things that... And
I'll just interject here, Bill. You asked a question. You said Gary came home the repentant sinner, and that's not always the case. That was not the case in this couple, nor is it in a lot of the couples we've had. But there are still a lot of similarities in the process. And when you can come together as couples and address some of those similarities, and they see the value of being totally honest, of revealing everything at once, we've all learned from each other.
Yeah.
What do you do in a group if you have an unrepentant spouse? I mean, obviously, we're called as Christians to speak the truth in love. But if we're in a group with 5, 6 other couples, and there's a husband who is in denial and is justifying his behavior, do the other men kind of go after him, Gary?
Well, I think they wouldn't be there. I don't know. There's a criteria that we come into, and we really, even though they have to be able to speak this, and we know that sometimes their heart attitude might be a little bit different than what they're speaking, but one of the criteria we have for the group is that we have 2 willing hearts sitting there. And even though they may still be very much processing this whole thing, but you're right. If it does get behind closed doors where we're in the gender groups and we can start to see that coming through, the other guys will definitely talk to them about it.
There are things done in those gender groups that cannot be duplicated anywhere else.
And one point that we haven't brought up here is the fact that this is an adjunct to counseling. One of the first things that we say is it's so important that the couple is in counseling before they get into the support group setting. Now, there have been instances where we believe God doesn't make mistakes and He's put couples in our paths, but we constantly push the fact that you need a relationship with a professional Christian counselor that can provide that lifeline to you. So, because there's going to be issues that are going to come up in this processing that goes through as we go through in the groups, that you're going to hit bumps in the road and you're going to need that counselor. There was a time when Mona and I went through a really rough time about 10 months in, and I didn't know if we were going to make it through that.
That was our worst time, was 10 months into our recovery.
It was really a tough time.
That's going to be discouraging for some people to hear.
Yeah.
It is discouraging and we really avoid all talk of time because it's like Gary said, it's over when it's over, but it is indeed a long process. Yeah. It's not going to be over in a few weeks.
Right. Do you get skeptical when somebody comes in and says, I just found out about this 2 weeks ago, but we're totally healed.
Yeah.
God has,
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, when we have couples come in and they've had a rough week and they're pretty miserable, it's been bad, we'll look at them and we'll say, I'm really sorry, but you're working.
Yeah.
And that makes us feel good about
good
your
thing.
relationship. You're doing the hard and dirty work. If you come in holding hands saying, we're doing great, that tells me you're not working.
Not that they don't ebb and flow.
They
There
do
are
ebb and
times
flow.
that they're
We
doing
do
very
advise,
well. That's
take a
right.
break.
That's right.
Yes,
But one of the
yes.
key things is it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's going to take a while. And throw all thoughts of a timeline out. And here's why. If you say, well, you'll be done in 6 months, well, what if we're not? Then all of a sudden it's, no, we're not working. Or you're going to be done in 6 months. Well, what if we think we're done in 3 months? So you never really know. You just have to throw out all that and really take on the thing. It's over when it's over. And just think of it as a marathon and not a sprint. And just really concentrate on the us factor. Concentrate on you as a couple.
Now, one of the things we haven't addressed here is, what do you do when you have children? You had 3 boys. They were old enough to understand what was going on. Did you share this with them?
We did not share what was going on with our children or our families at the time. And what we did do with our oldest child, certainly they knew something had happened because this woman and her family were out of our life. And we just explained that they were having marital problems, figuring that was true. And so that's what we advise couples to do, because the children do know something's wrong. I mean, there's no hiding the fact that something's wrong. What we encourage couples to do is determine together what they're going to say to the children, what words they're going to use, because you don't want to use an inflammatory word that's going to start something. Go to them together and say, in whatever verbiage you've predetermined, Mom and Dad are struggling. There is a problem. We're working on it. You can pray for us. And depending on age appropriateness, they don't need the details any more than everybody else needs the details. What we often do sometimes is place all the burden of the pain on their shoulders with the initial revelation. And then we run and hide to try and heal, and they don't get any of the healing process.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So we put a burden on them. So, now there seems to be 2 common reactions to this, and one is that the spouse will shout it from the rooftops, and everybody knows.
Yes.
Or they hide in their homes. I think more commonly people tend to hide in their homes. They're there in your church. They're sitting next to you.
Yes, they
but
are.
they're smiling at you. They're shaking your hand in the narthex, and they're going home and hiding it. Nobody knew what we were going through.
How do you think that needs to change? My perspective is that pastors need to be willing, it has to come from the top. Pastors need to be willing to openly address that this is an issue, and that this is an issue in our very congregation.
Right.
If they don't, if we're all just the bright, smiling, happy Christians, and we're ignoring or denying that this problem exists, these people aren't going to get help.
No, they
That's
won't.
exactly right.
That's exactly right, Bill. You made a great point, because when we talk about conservative figures have adultery maybe at a 25% level, and then you start doing the math within your congregation, you think, where are these people? And they're exactly what you said. They're sitting there, big smiles on their face. And why is that? It's because they're afraid of the scandal, of the wildfire that will just spread between the congregation, and then they're ashamed, and they might lose their relationships there at the church, or lose their church affiliation there altogether. And so there's just so much involved. So they choose to just go home and deal with this, and they're dying left and right. And then that was one of the things that was so important to us is if we can plug in some way, the answer, I believe, is somewhere in a regional type basis where they can maintain their anonymity, where this couple can say, I can reach out for help somewhere, but I don't necessarily have to do it on the local church level. Now, I agree with you, doing it from the pulpit is a great idea, but I wonder, it's not something you'd stand at the pulpit and say, now those of you who are having this problem, we're going to meet up in room 204. I don't think that's going to happen, So it has to be on more of a regional basis. And unfortunately, I think Mona's initial response to the counseling idea is pretty common. It's like, well, what are they going to do? The deed is done. What are they going to have for us? When we finally got into counseling, and it wasn't too long afterwards, and it was it was a God thing, definitely. But he saw immediately that this was something that we needed to deal with, and so we started moving down that path. But yeah, I think the couples, if they could find some sort of a regional resource of some sort, and that was the whole idea behind the book, was when we wrote that book, it was one of those things that as we started this support group, And I'll just kind of back up on the timeline for our ministry is as we had that need ourselves or that other couple, that Jesus with skin on, that needed to be there for us, and wasn't there, and then we were obedient and met with the other couple. Well, after about a year of meeting together, that same counselor came back to us and said, hey, how about you guys heading up a support group? And at that point, Hope and Healing was born.
I'm thinking of a couple who is right in the throes of discovering an infidelity right now, listening, maybe a husband, maybe a wife, and they're looking at a crossroads. And there's a lot of people in their life, even a lot of godly people in their life that are saying, you need to head towards separation. You need to head towards divorce. And they're not hearing the voice that there's hope out there for the other path.
So
and
true.
That's the voice that we believe God has chosen for us to
Would you just speak to that person right now and tell them why they should consider rebuilding after a broken trust?
So many times we have couples sit across from us, and what they say is, this is too painful. I can't do it. I just want it over. I just want it over. And I can look at those people and say, okay, you really want it over? Then go through the hard work of reconciliation and recovery. Because if you get a divorce and you have children, it will never be over. This person will always be a part of your life. And you are still going to have to go through this process, only now you will go through it alone. If you really want it over, go through the process of healing for your children, for yourself. I look at what Gary and I have had 14 years past adultery. I mean, how much we would have missed if we hadn't gone through that healing process. It is so worth it. And we're not the only ones.
No.
We've got co-facilitators that can tell you the same story.
And stories of other couples that come to us. And just to address the people that might be sitting out there right now on the couch and they're in that same exact situation. They're just in the throes of the chaos of all this and they don't know what to do with it. You need to hear that you can get through this.
Yes.
You can make it through. You can end up with a relationship. I'm getting all choked up, sorry. But you can end up with a relationship that you'll have trust, you'll have intimacy, these things that you think you'll never have. You will have that. You will get that back. Because with God, He heals. He does. And He's done it for us, and He's done it for countless of other people. And the emails I received, alluding to earlier, from couples that would say, if you change the names, in the book, it's our story. We thought we were so alone in all of this, and now we know that we can make it through this. It's just so rewarding for us to see that.
Something that I think would be tremendously helpful to a couple who is in the throes of this right now is to hear the two of you tell each other how much you love each other all these years down the line. I mean, you've been through a tremendous amount of pain. You've come out the other side of it. How do you feel about this guy now who cheated on you, who had an affair on you 14 years ago?
Gary is my best friend. He is my husband. I love him dearly. We've been married 33 years. There was a 3-year period that was very ugly. He failed me. But I failed him in those 33 years too. He will fail me again. I will fail him again. But we have a relationship that is awesome. I can't imagine life without him. And there is indeed, people say, do you trust him? Yes, I do. Not that I know what he's going to do, because nobody knows what anybody's going to do. We just all thought we knew. But I trust him to make the right decision. Now, I won't do this again, Bill. I'm not going to lie to you. It's
this
not carte blanche. It's a great hedge. But we do love each other, and we do have fun. And I think Gary is an honorable man. And that is part of the forgiveness, is that he's the entire composite of who he is. He isn't just an adulterer. He's the man I fell in love with. He's the father of my children. And I respect him.
Well, I would just like to say that I love this woman more today than I ever have. And there's a lot of people that think that adultery doesn't happen in good relationships. And I think that the 20 years that we were married prior to the adultery were good years. I think that we had issues through this whole time. I think that as we came through the adultery, it honed such communication skills for us and taking on that aspect of we're not going back to the way it was. We want to make this better. We really want to try to really make this right. We've had a chance to truly communicate at a level of intimacy that we never had before that. We share that today. There's a trust, there's an admiration. I love her more today than I ever have in my life. And I think that it's so worth it to do that. And for couples that are sitting out there thinking, yeah, well, I don't know if we're ever going to make it through that. You really can. And we have so many examples of that.
Well, 15 years ago, I didn't know either.
No, you didn't. No, you didn't.
No,
We didn't know. It was so chaotic. But you can get through this. And if they hear anything from this broadcast, Bill, is they can get through this.
God is sufficient for even this.
I don't know about usually, but I have big tears in my eyes. It's beautiful. Gary and Mona Shriver, thank you so much for your hearts, for your testimony, for your example. It's truly inspiring to all of us.
Well, thank you for having us here.
It's an honor.
Today.
It is the most precious ministry that we have been on. I mean, like Gary said, the emails we get, it's just God blesses us for the ministry.
Thank you for your
basis.
humility and your courage to just lay this out there for so many others to benefit from.
Once again, their book is called Unfaithful: Rebuilding Trust After Infidelity. Gary and Mona, thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Our guests for the past couple of days here on Focus on the Family have been Gary and Mona Shriver, and it's our prayer that their transparency and the words that they've shared on these two broadcasts have offered some encouragement to you. God has obviously blessed them and kept them together for more than 30 years now of marriage, and as you've heard today, they're really devoted to each other. Obviously, the work of God in their hearts, and we realize that not everyone who's gone through this kind of a situation will be able to see their marriage restored, as the Shrivers have, but we trust there's hope. Wherever there's a sign of repentance and when a couple is really willing to do the work to see restoration take place. Now, the Shrivers are moderating an online forum again today through our website, and if you have any questions or comments and you'd like to join in on the conversation, we'll invite you to do so. Go to family.org, click the broadcast button, and when you get there, you'll find out more about their excellent book, which we highly recommend, Unfaithful: Rebuilding Trust After Infidelity. We'll also have a link to their ministry where you can find out more about what they do and how you can be involved in the lives of couples dealing with this issue. And there's also a CD of this 2-day broadcast. We'll include additional discussion on that CD, by the way, material we couldn't include in our 30-minute programs. And then there's a booklet that we have available called Nothing to Hide, which provides specific suggestions on how to manage the crisis of infidelity. All of that material, those resources, and the information about the online forum at family.org. If you'd prefer, call us at 1-800-232-6459. 800, the letter A, and the word family. Now, if you need counseling, we do have counselors here, and they can provide an initial consult with you and then direct you to further help with someone in your area. And you can just use our 800 number for that call. Today's program was provided by Focus on the Family and hosted by psychologists and authors Dr. Bill Meyer and Dr. Julie Slattery. Thanks for tuning in. I'm John Fuller, inviting you back tomorrow when we'll continue this week's emphasis on marriage and once again turn our hearts toward home.